Gryfford, they've really hyped up in the storyline as being this like super strong, interesting character. So I'm very interested to just see him actually do something, really anything. So I just like his design. Burrell, I thought
Oh, Ready Player Will.
Welcome back, Visions fans. So yes, at the outset of the year, JD79 had done a top 5 most wanted units in the upcoming year. 8 months ago, I had wanted Gryfford, and he's finally here, so I am very excited to dive into his review, and hopefully there isn't any kind of bias here. Hopefully I can check my bias at the door. But let's kick things off. So today's presentation, pretty straightforward. The character overview, base and total stat analysis, along with all of those other stats leading up to the report card, where we'll contextualize some of those stats with the rest of his kit and what we know. The general thoughts, where I give some extra details that kind of segues into what we know about the passives, the counters, the job abilities, how he's supposed to function as a unit. Talk a little bit about the AI priority, which is very interesting for Gryfford. We'll get to that obviously in a little bit. The TMR review, the job-based division card eligibility for his rainbow potential, and then Esper Synergies and weapon optimization. So kicking things off here, Gryfford, a brand new ice unit added here to Global. They've given him the unique main job of Axe Knight with Martialist and Strider as the two sub-jobs here. He does equip axes as his weapon with armor, helm, and accessories, so he does skew on some of the heavier type of equipment, the more bulky kind of equipment. He does have a move of 3 with a jump of 1 as a 70 cost unit. My faith recommendation here is 70, if not higher. He's got some status elements that I think are particularly noteworthy to lean into, that I actually don't hate having that faith stat that high. And I'll circle back to that in a second here when we talk about the weaknesses. Obviously, lots of you see that magic weakness there. But for now, he's got a max range of 5. Forgive me, quick ninja edit. It's a max range of 4. It's actually his limit break. That is the 5th square away. But from just a main job perspective, max range of 4 squares away, 1 AoE, and 3 single target abilities. From a resistance standpoint, 20% to slash, 15% to strike as his 2 highest. He's at 5% to missile, neutral at 0% to pierce, and that minus 10% being a big magic weakness. And yes, although I have that faith recommendation, which means he will take more damage from magic units, I do think there are some things you could hedge against that, and he's one of the few characters where I think the upside is worth the downside, but that's certainly debatable. You can do whatever you like with that. In that conversation, being cognizant of what you can be afflicted by ailment-wise with that higher faith, he's got 50% resistance to confusion, 50% to doom, which is kind of not great, and 10% to sleep. Overall, these could be better. I don't think these are any remotely of my favorite ailments to resist against, so that's probably a thumbs down in my opinion, but overall doesn't change my thoughts on that faith recommendation. Now, from a mastery ability perspective, they gave him 10% HP, 10 defense, and the dream ability, they gave him 10% slash res, 10 strike res, and 10 unit res. Which means, quick ninja edit here again, he really has 30% slash res and 25% strike res. So it's certainly nice they leaned into those two meta niches, if you will, from a resistance standpoint. And that 10 unit res is obviously very strong as what we've seen shifting in the current game as well. Now, from a base stats perspective, he is exceptionally high here on the base HP side of things, and he is a little bit of a pseudo tank. We'll talk about that more in the general thoughts in just a couple slides. So this is very important that his base HP is this high. He's also got very high base attack here so far. Not top of the charts, but very high enough that any kind of attack scaling things are going to obviously go very well with that. From an agility perspective, yes, more toward the bottom of the list for base agility, but we know this stat isn't the end-all be-all. Passives and board stats typically have a lot more impact on what that final number is. The dexterity stat also is overall below average here, not necessarily known for his crit hit rate potential, but the luck stat here base-wise, very high. Again, very good for crit evasion potential, so certainly nice to see. And as we transition these 5 charts into one, I'm actually a little surprised here for a 70 cost unit. This is irregular, to say the least, to see some of these stats this high from a base stat perspective, particularly when you consider we're just looking at Charles like earlier in the day. Huge disparity in what they tend to offer despite having the same costs. That's not a fair apples to apples comparison, though. Obviously, he's a tank, she's a support. They should be different. But the point is, 70 cost units typically are a little bit behind average on stats, and that doesn't seem to be the case here for Gryfford at first glance. And even the total stats, when you start implementing the board nodes, the other mastery ability stats and whatnot, there's a couple shifts here. Yeah, he takes a step back on the attack stat because they do allocate a lot more of those stats to his HP, but overall, his attack stats just fine. There's really no glaring weaknesses here from a total stats perspective. Now, as we look at some of these other stats here, the agility, yes, he's definitely below average here. When we talk about agility with no passives, he's about that 74 mark, which is I think like 3 agility points below average. He does have a passive though that can bump them up a little bit of a higher tier, but that may not be optimal, and that's actually by design that he's just a smidge slower. That's a good thing. We'll see just a couple slides here, but yeah, agility, we'll circle back onto some of the report card, but just a smidge below average. Now the crit hit and crit avoid, as we saw, the dexterity stat, not his main strength, and so crit hit rate, kind of that same idea. He doesn't have any board notes to amplify it. Correction, he does. He has 8% crit rate on the board note, so that is slightly higher. Better than what I thought, quite honestly. It's not the worst spot. A lot of characters are in this relative range. From a crit avoidance rate, despite that very high luck stat, he's overall not in a bad spot here. About 54% here for crit avoidance. Either way, no glaring strengths or weaknesses here from either one of these stats. The accuracy, definitely not his strong point either, but not awful. He's actually right around the average here for total accuracy with no passives, and he does have a 25% accuracy passive, which does bump him up to this higher tier. Now, he still needs a ton of potential help to even sniff hitting accurate units, and quite honestly speaking, he likely is probably not going to, even if you do that, just because ice isn't really tailor-made to be hyper accurate without a lot of external help. But it's there, certainly nice to see. Not the end of the world for him. From an evasion perspective, he's right here at the bottom of the gradient curve too. I don't think he's an evade unit. I don't think he's evade capable. Ice units by and large don't have the vision card equips to pull that off. So although statistically it may seem like it, definitely not an evade unit. But that all leads us here to the report card and effective HP. He is an A+. I was almost tempted to give him an S here. He is the bulkiest effective HP of any DPS in the game. He is right there with the tanks. Yes, he is even more effective HP bulky than Celeste, than Sephiroth, than Vega. He is right there. He's above Joom. He's above Alphonse. It's pretty exceptional how high his HP stat gets. And he's got 18 defense innately, no spirit, but he's got 15 AoE res from a passive, 10 unit res from the 140. He's got 8 unit res on his weapon. He's got 40 element chain res on that same passive as the 15 AoE res, and that enormous HP stat really just bumps him to the top of the charts at the end of the day, with the only negative weapon resistance being the minus 10% to magic, which isn't enough to really skew him either way. Now, survivability, I'm going with a B+ here. His main buff is a 7,500 HP physical barrier. It's not a general physical barrier. He does have a second buff, though, that gives him 20 defense, 20 strike res, and another 40 element chain res, which is why the slower agility isn't the end of the world of him. That's kind of the intention as a pseudo tank, and again, I'll come back to that in a second, where having that 80 element chain res means that, yes, even if he gets lapped, he doesn't take the same upside of damage as most other characters do. So it's kind of by design that he doesn't have as many turns, and that means he can keep his buffs longer because they're not wearing off as quickly. He's also courage capable on his martialist sub-job, and I think he's status effect capable here, which is also why I recommend that higher faith, which is part of the survivability, where if you put enemies to sleep, if you can frostbite them and reduce their overall AP to hit you as often, those are also parts of survivability too. So overall, I like what he does here. Damage, I'm going with a B here. The thing is, he has a great attack stat, great ways to amplify it. The defense pen is really his biggest upside here, where he's got 2 passives that, if equipped, you could theoretically get him to 100 defense pen all of the time. That's not a practical build, but it's there. His slash res pen is what's limiting, though. He only gets really up to 50, 10 from a Trust Dome passive, and his main short range attack that you'll end up using gives him another 40. So yes, his slash res pen is really where he's kind of limited, but there's a lot of characters as of late where that slash res pen isn't as high. Overall damage is hard to really quantify here because it's not really what he's known for either. But the defense pen is certainly a nice thing to see. Now, agility, going with a C-, as we saw, slightly below average, 74 versus that 77 average. If you equip his passive that gives him agility, you get a little bit closer to that. Still not a strong point. I actually don't even think you need the agility one, and I don't recommend it. We'll talk about why when I get to that section. The accuracy, going with a C+ here, average accuracy, does have that passive that bumps him up a step, but overall going with a C+, not a strength, not a weakness, just kind of right there in the middle. The evasion, going with a C- too. Possible, not practical. Wouldn't recommend that. The movement, I'm going with a B though, because he does have a move +1 passive. Now, I don't recommend that either. We'll talk about why soon, but he does have access to it. That's more than many other characters can say. So that's a good thing. The auto ease of use, though, this is the first real trip up that I think Gryfford comes across. I'm going to go with a C here. The amount of passives he has and which one to use, the buff creativity and movement, and the mid-fight hate shuffle, which I will talk about soon, I promise, could be difficult for most people to just put him in a team and have him work. So there's a little more thought to getting his upside here, but we'll talk about why. The game disruption, I'm also going with a D here. The 70 cost is a really tough sell, obviously, in this Vizier crunch. Ice overall is relatively, underrepresented by most of the player base. Wind isn't very scary as a matchup either at the moment, so it's not like there's a huge demand for ice units. The Axe Vision cards, they're fair, but not perfect, so you don't really see a lot of, rainbow usage. There is a big water synergy, though, where obviously you have Summer Glaciella and all these great new water vision cards that have come out. But overall, I don't really think his introduction into the game is going to make any waves. The passive abilities here, I am going with a B. Great passives for a variety of builds and potential metas. Obviously, just wish you could use them all. The counter abilities, going with an A here. He does have an awesome main counter, is physical reflex capable as well. And the overall job and kit, I'm going with an A- here. Great character concept, good PvE potential. He's got a job that, yes, you can lean into it, but there are other alternatives. They're probably not optimal for auto PvP, but generally speaking, there's a lot of things to like for a final grade of a B. He's an excellent cost-limited character. I don't think he's going to unlock any secrets in the current meta, though. I do think he's got some future limitations with Souls release and some of the fire we're going to see in that uptick there. But overall, he is very, very solid as a character in the game. As a 70 cost unit, you're getting a very good return on that Vizier spent. But let's jump into the general thoughts, and let's finally highlight why I keep hinting at this pseudo-tank concept. Well, one of his main abilities here on the 120 that gets upgraded, this is an exceptional ability. It's a Select 2, it's his 40% slash res pen. It's a decreased CT of 25. That's higher than Elias, by the way. Hers is only 20, but it's increased chance of being targeted by 6. And because of the nature of this being a shorter, 3-range attack, it means that obviously as the fight starts happening and people start attacking, this and that, it's not until it is in range that he uses this that all of a sudden he's going to shift the hate in mid-battle. And so yes, he is a pseudo-tank in that regard, that he's going to draw all the aggro to him in that mid-fight. And so from that perspective, exceptional survivability as a pseudo-tank there. Highest of his class, right up there with the tanks for effective HP. 15 AoE res, 18 unit res innately with that weapon. His counter ability, which we haven't seen yet, is 40 AoE res to himself and allies in a giant diamond AoE. That's 7,500 HP physical barrier, 80 element chain resistance after his buff. His main sub, which is part of his potential build theory here, does offer a 20% HP heal back, and he is courage capable should you want to go that way on the March list sub-job instead. So there's a couple different ways to tap into that. And the X factors, tangibles, if you will, to do that job, I think are present. He's got that 250 CT down on that ability we just talked about. So you talk about slowing enemy turn order, allowing your teammates to kind of get some extra stuff in. He's got access to both sleep and frostbite, technically slow as well, though I think sleep and frostbite are the big ones, which are great things for, intangibles for slowing down enemies and what they do. And his main sub job, AoE offensive ability, also has an effect of 50% increased AP consumption to those enemies. So you talk about depleting the enemy AP, that's another way to do it. So there are some X factors here, which again, a little hard to make work in auto PvP, but they're there. Overall short range potential of many of these attacks do give him some good buffing opportunities, in my opinion, where if you want to go his main buff, the second buff, go for a TMR, that is absolutely possible for him. So I don't think that's a weakness like it is for some other units. A good physical bulk for the current meta, at least, where we saw that slash res, the strike res, the unit res. The magic weakness is exposed. There's ways to get around it. I know, fortunately, for ice units in particular, Fenrir, the old school vision card, is that 50% attack. It's also the magic res. That's a great sub vision card to throw in at that party still. There's ways to get around that. I'm not terribly worried. And he does have very versatile passives and sub-jobs for different build options, which is great for meta shifts that as things change in the game, he has sub-jobs that alter the way you might play him. He's got passives that alter the way you might play him. So I like that he has both of those things to go with him. The ice element does have great upsides to water, as we've seen. Obviously, the dual element nature of them work very well together, and they have great vision card support. The axe vision cards are okay for now. They could be better for rainbow use, but certainly, who knows what's going to come down the line. Like Reagan and Howlett and Ice Jaden, these are great characters. They just require the right skill and conditions to make them work, and that's kind of the auto ease of use. These are not characters that are plug and play and just they can just carry your fights for you. That's not these kinds of characters. That doesn't mean they're bad characters, though. Now, finally, one thing I want to bring up, I don't often talk about reincarnation in these character reviews, but there is a huge miss on not giving him the tank reincarnation stats because of that hate ability. And there is precedent for that. For Eld Leonis, they did give him the tank reincarnation stats of that 3300 HP, of the extra crit evade, because Eld's limit break gives him 6 hate when used. And so it's kind of a similar concept that mid-fight, Eld will just walk up on someone, use that limit break, generate the hate toward him. And so he is kind of that pseudo tank. They did not do that with Gryfford, though. They gave him the regular 2400 HP, which is fine, but I would have liked to see it considering that's kind of the role they designed him for. But regardless, let's get into the passive abilities. Chivalric Devotion is by far the best one here. 12% HP, 40 element chain res, 15 AoE res. After this, it's genuinely debatable which ones you want to lean into. Martialist Lore and Natural Instincts both offer 40 defense pen. Really just a question of whether you want the attack or whether you want the accuracy. Again, debatable on the meta, debatable on what you're seeing. Battlefield mobility is nice for the agility. I actually don't love the move +1 on this, though. The reason why I'm just kind of game planning, again, X's and O's in my head, I don't want him to be the frontline unit to start this fight. I want him to be a space or two away from someone who can take a hit to start, so that mid-fight, he can then swoop in, draw the hate, and by that time, he's still full HP. My worry giving him that extra move is that he becomes your frontline unit, takes some damage, then gets the hate, and then just dies because he's already half HP anyway. I think that's likely not going to lead to good results, and obviously the agility there, although good, means that you don't really get the full upside of the elemental chain res, means your buffs wear off a little more quickly. So I like it. I need to practice more with it, though. And the Axe Knight lore is really just more for, like, I don't know, full offensive build, which certainly is possible. We've seen the defense pen, the attack stat you can get to, it's theoretically there, just not my favorite. Now, the counter abilities. Willing Protector is my favorite here. 30% chance to proc. It's 40 AoE res for 1 turn for himself and allies. I think that's absolutely awesome, just to get that extra survivability. He does have that physical reflex, which certainly is nice too. I just think that one's, that rate is a little bit lower, that for all the reaction block rate in the game, I don't think this one's as reliable to rely on. Then again, anything that's at 30% or lower isn't reliable anyway. That's a pretty low percentage, but I do think there's a debate which one you want to use. I just think Willing Protector is overall better. Now, for the main job buffs, one of the coolest things about this character is that it's not what you'd expect. Most characters in this game, their buff priority is typically a teammate buff first and then a single self buff. That is not the case with Gryfford, and it's a very, very smart they did this. His main priority buff is Axeman's Ward. It's the self buff that gives him the 7,500 physical damage barrier. It's also a 40% attack buff and a 25% agility buff. The reason why I like this is because turn 1, he'll use this on himself, walk straight forward. Turn 2, he'll start using Enduring Formation, which means if there's a teammate behind him, yeah, he might walk backward to that teammate and use this buff, which I like. Again, I don't want him frontlining. I want him to be a step back from whoever's trying to be in the lead. And so, yeah, if you take that second turn to move horizontally or even backward to get that defensive strike res, the elemental chain res, I like that a lot, not even considering the fact that you could throw a TMR in there as a teammate buff as well to kind of switch things up. So this is a very unique thing they did from an AI perspective that I think is going to fly under the radar for most people. Now, for the main job offensive, there's a lot to like here as well. Seal and Cleave is a 15 AP ability. Again, very short range, only 2 squares away. It's a reduced counter chance of 100% for 3 turns. Obviously, I think that's got some good value here. The Sleep Reaver ability, there is a typo on WOTV stats. This is his furthest range hit ability here, 4 squares away. It's the AoE. It's a 40% chance to sleep, which is higher than the average 25% on these status ailment abilities. So there is a relatively decent chance you could land this, even on 50 faith units. The thing about this ability that's misstated, though, it acts similar to Winged Sterns, that the damage changes depending upon how many people are in this AoE. So if there's only one person in the AoE, you'll get an extra 75 modifier. That's a 250 modifier ability. If there's 3 people in it, then it just drops back down to the 175. So that's kind of cool how it shifts the damage modifier there. Mortal Draw here is another 4 range ability. Dispels Re-Raise is also absorption of 30% of that damage done, which is not going to be enormous, I don't think. So I'm not really relying on that for a lot of self-sustain. But Dual Judgment, as we saw before, is that 3 square range diamond around him. Select up to 2. The slash res pen of 40. The decreased CT of 250. Again, that's higher than what Alaya does for decreasing CT to your party. Hers is only 200, and it's the increased chance of being targeted for self of 6. Overall, there's a lot to like about this, and I'm going to touch back on Sleep Reaver in just a couple slides here where we talk about Strider, because there's something very interesting about that with the Frostbite overlap that I have never talked about on the channel. It's an old secret that the top end of the game is kind of held close to the chest that I'm finally going to share with you all. Now, the limit break and other, this is a great limit break. It's a double hit, 43 AP. This is the 5 squares away though, so there's actually some thought I might even disable this in some instances, but it's a 200% mod, decrease AoE res of 30 for 3 turns to those targets. Obviously an apparel that you love to see. We've seen how hard that can hit with Summer Helena as well as Bart's and what that decrease of AoE res can do. But getting back to the sub-jobs, Axe Knight here, this is a really fun one where, again, this is move unit to target panel. Sorry, I'm just full of ninja edits today. This is the range. It's technically 4 squares away, but it's that giant square AoE. Again, the reason why I like this, if you let him lag behind a little bit, this is an ability that mid-fight occurs, he can leap forward and take that frontline attack a little bit later. It's the decreased AP consumption of 50 for 3 turns. The Knight's Remedy I also like a lot though, where again, if you consider he's short range, should you kill off an enemy and someone else isn't in range, he's going to stop for a turn and likely heal himself here. So I do like this not only for second fights, but also for what it offers mid-fight and the dispel of all of these status ailments. Again, you consider I'm recommending 70 faith, if not higher. If he gets afflicted by any of these, he can dispel them as well by using this. I like this sub-job a lot. I really think it's debatable whether it's one of the best of the 3, because the Martialist, I love the courage capability here. Now, I don't love anything else on this sub-job. I don't like the buffs. I don't like the attacks. Even Pierce the Heavens, one of the things I've run into is because of that increase of the defense pen and the potential modifier increase, they'll often spam this ability instead of anything on the main job, and it typically defeats the purpose of their main job if they just end up spamming Pierce the Heavens. Yes, it might technically do the most damage, but you're probably losing out a lot on what they're supposed to do. But I love the courage option here. I think it's super valuable. I think it's worth considering. And finally, the Strider job here. To me, this is where you get some of that extra PvE upside, where you have slow potential, you have the double hit on Lupine Rend. But Frost Axe, again, I love this ability here for PvP potential with the Frostbite, the decrease of healing power of 40. And this is what I want to finally let you guys on a secret about, is that it's very worth noting that you should potentially leave Sleep Reaver unleveled at level 1. For those of you that have watched my channel this long, for those of you that are 25 minutes into a video, I'm finally giving you this nugget of information. One of the tweaks that we do at the top end of the game sometimes is manually adjust the skill level of how high we level these abilities so that we intentionally decrease the modifier. The way the damage calculation works in this game is that it'll always optimize how much damage you do, and if there's a tiebreaker between the damage, it'll opt for the lower AP ability. What that means is, this Sleep Reaver ability, if you get enemies who are clumped together in a group of 3, the modifier, unleveled, will be 140 plus 25. That's 165 modifier. That's tied with Frost Axe's 165% modifier. Now, Frost Axe only has 22 AP. Sleep Reaver is 25 AP. So in that instance, there's a group of 3 enemies grouped up, and you leave Sleep Reaver unleveled at level 1. The AI will opt to use Frost Axe instead. This is a very high-level way to think about min-maxing your AI in auto PvP. There's typically not always a correct answer, and even this, I'm still testing. I'm not recommending it quite yet, But for those of you who have watched this far in the video, I wanted to mention it to give you that nugget of information because I like that option a lot. Not necessarily as much as I like the courage, maybe not necessarily as much as I like the self-heal back and the increase of AP consumption. Again, all debatable depending on the map, the meta, the team formations, all of those things. Just something to point out. Now for the TMR review, this, like many other TMRs we've seen lately, is conceptually a good one from the Ice and Wind res of 20%. Love to see the Diamond AoEs. Obviously, those are great for movement potential. The attack of 40% is certainly nice for self. 2 cast is a great thing to see. I think the 2 agility certainly is nice when you talk about min-maxing your turn order and having, options on your TMRs to get to agility levels that you might not otherwise. I don't think it's a great TMR right now, but I appreciate the value of the diamond shape. I think it's a good buff overall. As the meta shifts, we'll see what it brings in the future. But for now, not an enormous pull or need for this TMR. Now for the job-based vision cards, once again, huge thank you to JB79 for this, and I'm so sorry, I know my camera cuts off part of this. This vision card on the very top right is the new Alaya vision card that just came out a week or two ago. Axe has some good stuff here. You do have an area res card, you do have a unit res card, you do have an agility card. They could use a couple more of them though, but technically have that second unit res card on Coral vision card as well that has the magic res on it, which helps with his magic weakness. So this is a good starting spot for Axe teams. I just haven't seen a lot of upside for any of the potential Axe Rainbow teams yet, but that obviously remains to be seen. Now for the Esper Synergies, nodes to focus, I would say matchup specific, because again, he is a tank-oriented character. It's really just making sure he does that job well at the end of the day. So if you need a certain matchup resistance of element res or a weapon type res, that's your number one priority. After that, I'd probably go for more agility or some of the intangibles where again, he's a slower character, so maybe going for an Esper that's a little bit faster. And namely of those intangibles, I bring up someone like Dark Siren who just came out. Yes, it's a magic-oriented Esper, but you talk about 18 agility, there's an extra 5 unit res on here, 35 reaction block rate, 20% debuff weakening effect, 7 crit evade, a little bit of accuracy here too. This is like a great X factor Esper for him, but in addition to that, you obviously could go for some of the typical ice Espers. Fenrir is great, it's got the slash attack and magic res. Glacial is great, it's got that slash attack modifier and the luck percent, which he has a very high base luck, and even Freesis for that spirit, the crit evade, the ice attack, a lot of good things there. And I do like Dark Odin as well, where Dark Odin has the human killer, the magic res, a couple of the versatile nodes there. But again, matchup specific, there's really a lot of variety, but there's a lot of ones to choose from. And finally, the weapon optimization. I do think his weapon is the best weapon. I like the assault, the 169 attack. I do think the critical is worth investing in too, just to have a second copy. I don't know if that 20% is going to make or break him hitting critical hits. I don't think it will, but I just prefer the assault overall. It's slash attack 15 for him, reaction block of 30, unit res of 8, and the defense pen of 20. So again, he can hit that permanent 20 defense pen with those 2 passives should you want to, I don't know, tank bust for PvE or manual PvP content. I do think this is the best axe, but the rune axe is an honorable mention. I just don't love this one because I don't think it really helps him do his job as consistently as his main job. Yes, decreased AP consumption. Yes, a little more damage, but he's not a main damage dealer that the rune axe really enables. So I don't think you get as much upside. And honorable mention, just because it's a TMR, is always Miraga's TMR because of the initial AP of 25. Again, if you're min-maxing your stats, this is one of the best axes to do it with. But that's the Gryfford review in a nutshell. I know this is a long review, but obviously this is a character I've been looking forward to, so I've very much enjoyed diving in and trying to dissect his kit, seeing where there's upsides for him. We've only had the one map in Guild Wars so far, so I haven't been able to really min-max him or tinker with him the way I would have liked, but I've got him fully built, and I'm very excited to see what I can do with him going forward here. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, everybody. I'll talk to y'all soon.